And we're back. Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to Deliberate, an Agile Product Owners podcast. My name is Cory Bryan, and she is Kim Andrikaitis.
Yes, I am. You didn't notice my haircut.
Did you get a haircut?
Like 4 inches. Typical male.
You didn't notice I shaved.
No, you shaved. I didn't notice that either.
See, these are the things that happen when you don't work with each other on a day-to-day basis.
Don't notice anything.
I usually think I'm pretty good at that. Noticing
you are
things.
Yes,
but today
not
so much.
No one said anything to me at work about my hair. And I thought they'll hate it. And if they did, that's okay.
I'm sure that's not true.
No, it's definitely not. They were just too busy to care about my hair.
That's what's been going on.
Not a lot. It's podcast day.
Yes, it is
the best day of every other week.
True. I agree 100%.
Happy to be here. I'm excited about today's topic.
Yes, we have a good topic.
Agreed.
I think you won, by the way.
I did?
You won on the topic discussion. The last episode, we decided whether we were going to do stories or backlog.
Yes.
And we hadn't made a decision. And then we decided stories last week. So you won on that topic.
Yes.
However, on the thing that we were talking about with Heinrich.
Calling that a draw.
I think it is a draw. I think we were both right and we were both wrong. So.
Apologies, Heinrich.
I don't know how we do that, but I think we call it a draw. But nevertheless, if you haven't seen the Agile Scrum Product Ownership in a nutshell, go watch it.
Go watch it. It's a fantastic video. And memorize what it's called. So when people ask you, you tell them the truth.
Yes. And it is March. It is finally starting to get a little bit warm. So we're starting to get out, and hopefully we won't have any more weather-related emergencies that cause us not to work with our teams.
That's true.
Because that sucks.
Yes.
So
spring is on the way, which is very, very nice here in Raleigh.
That is correct. Okay. So let's get into some things that interested us in the last 2 weeks. One of the things that I saw apparently was an older article from last year, but it's still very relevant, I think, at least to what I was reading it. It's an article by Sutha Kamal called Hiring a Great Product Leader. It was basically how you look for guys or girls that know how to build good products. What is their mindset? What are they looking for? Some of their experience or basically what they're looking for. One line he had in there it's a line that jumped out to me, is your product is the way you meet a customer's need. It's not your application. It's not your technology. It's not how your technology is delivered. It's how you meet that need. Throw away all the other stuff, and that's what your product is. And I really like that.
I like that too. It's very simple.
It is.
It's a simple concept, but it's very relatable. I like that too.
Yeah, I really like this. So that's a good article. And like I said, it's about a year old, but I didn't know it was a year old until I read through it twice.
God, it's ancient. It's a whole year old.
How dare me bring up something like that. But it was really good. We'll put a link to that in our show details so people can see that.
Yeah, I'd like to read that. I found something very super cool while I was shopping.
What's that?
Okay, so I was on Amazon, which is my second favorite website.
What's your first?
Black House White Market. It's shopping.
I like Amazon.
Yeah. And I came across these coaching cards, product owner coaching cards by Jeff Watts. So the purpose of the cards is that they serve as an aid for POs when faced with common dilemmas. So there are, I think, 56 cards in the deck. They ask questions like, who really wants this product or service? And the purpose of it is to help the PO stop and reflect on the situation. And I think they really help in finding gaps and stimulate conversations with the team. So, of course, I ordered them because I'm an impulsive shopper. I was like, oh, this is great. They were $19.99 on Amazon, and he also has 2 other coaching decks available. There's one for Scrum Masters, and there's also one for retrospectives. So by the time we get together again in 2 weeks, I should have the cards in front of us, and then we can talk through them a little bit further.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Very cool stuff.
And then the last thing that I saw that was interesting this week is I think the State of Scrum survey is up. The Scrum Alliance and a few of the other PMI organizations to get together once a year and do a questionnaire. It's open to anybody about how Scrum is being used in your organization or your experience with Scrum. and I took it last night. The report, at the end of it, when you fill out the survey, you can put in your email address and it'll send you the survey when everything's compiled so you can see. But I've participated the last couple of years. It's a very good kind of level set for that particular agile technique in the market. And I'm curious to see what the results are this year.
So what were the results last year? Do you remember?
There was a lot of pickup, a lot of adoption. I think it was I don't want to say the number because I'm going to get it wrong. I could be roughly right or precisely wrong. I'm not going to guess. I'm just going to say that number is out there, and I think there was a pickup. I think you could start to see a lot of mid-sized companies. It's always been popular in smaller companies, but I think a lot of mid-sized to larger companies are starting to have better adoptions if the culture is there. And that's something I think that they are trying to pull out in the survey is where exactly you're trying Scrum at and what type of organization are you trying it. There's a lot of questions about, do you have a PMO office? Are you moving from waterfall to Scrum? Are you starting new projects with Scrum? That type of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's a good survey and I encourage everyone to take it. Again, we'll have a link in our show details as we release it, hopefully soon.
Fantastic.
All right. So our topic today.
Best topic ever.
Is stories.
Love user stories.
User stories. Yes. So this is the core of what we do, as a product owner is we write, collate, and use stories to deliver value, to deliver our features. So we thought we'd start with some basics. So stories, user stories.
User stories.
What is a story?
Well, it's a very short, simple description of a feature told from the perspective of the person who wants the new capability. So essentially, the purpose of a story is to communicate to the team what needs to be implemented, what done looks like. They're usually small, they add value, and they're the best.
Yes. That definition is the one that Mike Cohen uses, by the way.
Yes.
I thought it was the best definition. So I stole it.
That's okay.
But I'm okay with that.
He'll be fine with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Small pieces of business value, can be delivered from the sprint. So, these stories can be anything. I like business stories that are focused on business value. I like technical stories. So things the team needs to do as far as refactoring or if there's any technical implementations we need to do. Research spikes, those can be stories. Anything can be put into this format. And then the purpose of the story is really to shift the writing to talking about features instead of just text on a page. We want to have these stories lead into conversations instead of just passing around documents. And I think that's a very strong indication of where your team is at and where your company's at is what do you focus on more? Do you focus on what's written or do you focus on the conversations around the stories that you're implementing in that sprint or in that release?
I agree with that statement. I think it really depends on the agile team maturity as far as how granular you get in the stories themselves, how much information and detail you put versus how many discussions do you have. I think it really depends on the maturity of the team. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And adding detail to the story as the requirements get better defined. The more you know, the more you can detail out these stories. We don't add detail to them out when we start them in a sprint. But before we do that, and then after we do that, we can create new stories that add further detail as we go. So a story, again, is just an idea for a feature. They have the business user in their core of what they're trying to deliver. And that's what we focus on.
So then, well, I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I am a big fan of knowing what the story is as much as I possibly can before I write the story so that when I get into a grooming session, the team and I can talk about the details of the story and then I have the answers for them. So I know you are kind of big on like throw one liner and go talk to the team. Whereas let me figure out what the acceptance criteria is. How do I know it's done? And I'm going to try to put as much detail in the story as possible because I think for me, it saves time. But again, it kind of goes back to the maturity of the team. Yeah.
And it goes back to the maturity of where you're at with your product too, because if you're just discussing back of the napkin conversations with a customer or client or one of your team members, your story at that point is a figment, right? It's just an idea. It's
Sure.
not developed. You haven't gone through anything else. You may need some more information as a product owner to say, well, I need to know what exactly this is going to do, but here's the idea that we have. And I like reviewing those ideas with the team to see if they can think of anything. And that's where I get into, okay, I may show you this idea of a story or this start of a story that I've got, but I'm not going to ask you to groom it yet. I'm not going to ask you to estimate it. I'm not going to ask you to do anything other than discuss it with
Think
me.
about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talk to me about what do you think is scary about this story? What do you think we need to learn more before we actually come back and ask you guys to look at this story for real? For implementation or for estimation or anything else.
And I think at that point, it's more of a concept rather than a story. It's more, cause at that point, it's more of a theme level, because I'm sure that the story's going to be, the theme's going to be broken down into multiple stories. So you're talking about initially just having that conversation with a team as opposed to going into a grooming session and saying we need to groom this.
Exactly. Yeah. I would never go into a grooming session with a team with a story that was just that idea.
With an idea.
Okay, give me an estimate. Because
That
they
would
couldn't.
never
They
work.
shouldn't. And I shouldn't ask them to.
Right.
Or I would be a bad product owner.
Yeah. So I think it's important that we do talk about kind of the phases and at what phase do you put the amount of detail that you need. So, we used to have this, this thing in place where the team would see the story 3 times. The first time they saw it, and I'm going to say not really the story, but the theme, the idea. They see it the first time as just a conversation, the second time in a grooming session, and then the third time at planning. Mm-hmm. And that was what we always end up doing. And that worked well because then they are aware of it from that idea phase all the way through to let's make this really happen.
Yeah. I like that. I like that concept.
So who actually writes the stories?
Anybody.
That's right.
Anybody.
Anybody.
Write a story. The PO is going to do some writing. Obviously, we're going to be the ones who collates and corrals, though, and puts them on the backlog. But I've had BAs write stories. I've had developers write stories, especially technical stories. It's great if you can get customers to write stories because they know what they're going to be doing with those stories. But really, it's anybody, especially if they have an idea. Let's talk about that idea. Let's get it on the story. Let's get it on the board. Let's talk about it. Let's collaborate on it.
Do we want, when these other people outside the team write stories, is it important for them to kind of follow the story structure as we put into place? Or is it just, hey, I know you have an idea. Let's go ahead and get it written down. Let's keep it in the backlog and let's have it for a future.
If it's somebody that is starting to do this with me, anything I can get from them, I'll take as this is a good starting point. And as we get more down the line with their stories or their ideas, then we can start to get into, okay, here's format and here's structure and here's kind of what we're doing. Because I'm going to do that anyway. If I have just a fragment of an idea, I'm going to go ahead and develop into a story and do all the things we need to.
Right.
But I think having them start that process, start with that mindset is a critical hurdle. And if I can get them over that hurdle any way possible, then I think that's the best thing to do.
Yeah. So to reiterate, anyone who identifies a need for the product can contribute to user stories. But the PO is ultimately the owner of those stories. So it's up to us to gather, maintain, and prioritize them.
Yes. So it may be something that we think, oh, that's a good idea. We should do that right now. Or
Right.
maybe something that it's a great idea for next quarter or something, and it just doesn't have a place in our backlog right now. But we need to understand all the requests, storage requests that come in, and figure out where they're going to go. So, yeah.
Agreed.
And I think a big thing also is the personas
Yes.
and who these stories are for.
Right. We definitely want to consider the end user. Think about who they are and why do they want the features. I think another thing that's really important is to understand the responsibilities of the users. So, who are they? Is the feature being built for someone who's technically savvy, or is the feature being built for someone like my mom, right, who just learned the power forward on her Gmail account? Literally.
Power forward?
Forward,
Oh,
reply
forward,
all,
yes.
forward.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
she just learned that. She learned links recently as well.
Wow.
So it's really important when I'm writing a story. Am I writing this from my mom's point of view, which is going to be a lot different than someone who's extremely technical. So it's important to contemplate the personas.
Yeah, it's a great UX practice that I've seen a lot of people do really well is go through and identify Personas identify types of users, the different types of users, because whether you have an operator or an admin or a user or somebody else, these people are going to use your app differently. They want different things out of it. That's where the personas can really help. And giving them, not just an operations user, but giving them a name. Joan is 42 years old and she's married and she works from home one day a week and she does these things. That really helps develop the character in your story, if you will, about who that's for, how they're going to use it. And it gives you that mindset when you're both testing, when you're talking about these stories. I really like that concept. And a lot of UX people do that really well for their designs.
It's always nice to come to an application and have a set of personas that someone's written for you already. Mm-hmm. So you have that. You're very lucky. If you have to write them yourself, actually it's very eye-opening, and you can engage with a whole bunch of different types of people to learn more about them and figure out what they do and what they're all about, what their day-to-day life is. And it's definitely something that's, I think, really imperative when we're writing our stories to know who we're talking about.
Yeah, and you don't need a lot of personas either.
No.
It's not like you need a dozen or so. You probably need maybe four maybe
or five.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something around there, just to give you the flavor of each of the type of users. I think those are good. And the other thing is, how do you capture stories? Where do stories come from?
Where do they come from? Cory, tell me a story.
Well, stories come from everywhere. They come from hither and far. Basically, any conversation you have with one of your users or one of your team members, you can come up with a story from that. Write it down. I carry around note cards, index cards with me all the time. I love whiteboards. I love walls that you can turn into whiteboards and just write on everything, or windows. I love writing on windows.
Yes, you do.
It drives people crazy, but I like it. It's a very beautiful mind type thing.
I think the trick here when you're capturing the stories is to listen to the people you're talking to.
Yes. I have a problem. My listening skills, I have to engage them in order to use them. I can't, it's not a passive thing.
Right.
But you have to listen to understand, not listen to react. I think it's a big thing, is hear what they say, understand what they're trying to say it back to them, and make sure you got it.
Right, because they'll ask for things and they don't even realize they're asking for them. So it's up to us to have that little ding, ding, ding. Oh, they want something. Mm-hmm. This is going to be a story. This is something that they're requesting that's going to add value to them.
Yeah. That's the best way for me is those open and honest conversations. There are other ways that things come in, both fortunately and unfortunately. If you get a requirements doc.
That never bothered me.
Really?
I didn't mind getting a 400-page requirements doc, and then I would spend forever extracting stories out of it. And it actually became more of a puzzle challenge thing for me. Mm-hmm. So it didn't bother me.
Okay. It bothers me, but that's okay. But, and again, I think the reason is because it's relying on that document that may or may not be accurate or may or may not be up to date, but it's true. A good starting point. I think it could be used as a starting point to say, hey, here's the features they're asking for, and let's figure out how we can turn those into stories. We have to extract that. We have to translate that. We have to figure out what that requirement, the system shall.
Yes.
Drives me crazy. But you can pull something out of that.
Right.
Pull something that useful. Requirements. Okay. Market research, workshops, great ways to get users in, get everybody in a room and tell everybody to write 5 stories. You could do it around themes. You could do it around, when you go visit a client or a client comes and visits you. Work out anything, just all kinds of ideas. Let's see if something gels. Or for a release, there's a thing called blitz planning, which I keep trying to do, keep meaning to do. A lot of people have told me about it, but I've never actually gotten to do that, where you go in for a release and you come out with everybody and you just go through the planning stages for the whole release. But it's a very big type of workshop. Haven't done it, but I hear good things about it. Also, I think analytics, any type of market data you have or data on your own applications, is a real good source to say, well, a lot of people are using this feature, so let's do some more things around there.
Or no one's using this thing.
Or no one's using this. Why in the hell are we spending time on it? Why did we just do a whole quarter release on this? Maybe it's because people don't know about it, or maybe they just don't like it, or maybe it doesn't serve the need. So I think using your gut is a big story driver for me. But backing that up, with data to say, hey, we thought this, the data says we're right, or come back and say, I'm thinking this. Let me look at the data and see if it looks like that's a good area to go down. And, oh, it is, or no, it's not. Why would we do that? So I think use whatever resources you have is the point to come up with your stories.
I wish I had something to add, but I don't.
Okay,
I think
good.
you've hit them all, except for maybe emails.
Oh, yes.
You get an email
Yes,
every
there's
now and
always
again.
email.
There's always that.
What else? Okay, let's talk about structure. Let's talk about what a story looks like. So I like the 3 C's as far as structure goes. That's the card, the physical card, not a virtual card, not an item in Jira or Rally or anything else. An actual card that you can hold and wave in front of somebody and say, this is what we're doing. Put it on a wall. The card is 1 C, confirmation. So that is the acceptance criteria on the back. So that's how you're going to make sure that story's done.
What phase are we in right now? Are we actually in grooming when you're
we're just
thinking
in
about
story creation?
All right, we're still in just the
So
ideas.
we have an idea. We've talked to our customer.
Okay.
He said, I really want to be able to do something. So I'm going to go grab my index card off my desk and I'm going to start writing a story.
So we're still kind of high level at this point. You could be at a theme level.
Yeah. You could be at a theme. You could be at epic level, whatever.
Okay.
So I'm going to write the story idea I have, or the story, on the card. And that's my first C. And then the confirmation. How am I going to make sure that that's done? What am I going to do? Quick, simple outline. I'm going to check this. We need to make sure the user can do this, or we need to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future, or that I can use payment methods or whatever else you're going to do there. And then it's the communication. It's communication around the stories. That's where we get into grooming. That's where we get into talking with the team, talking with the customer. Hey, I wrote this story based on the conversation we had yesterday. Let's go through it and see if it meets your needs, or if you can think of something else. So those 3 C's around the stories, I think, are big. The card, confirmation, and communication.
All right, I'm going to go a step deeper.
Okay.
I'm going to go down a level or down a level or 2.
All right.
To me, what you just said, it's fine. It's not good enough for me. I want more. All right. So I would like to have my stories in Jira because that's what I use, or any other software that you use to contain your stories. And I would start by formatting my stories. So it is as a persona. I want to do something so that I can derive some sort of a benefit. Because what that does is it allows me to really consider who the user is. So as my mom, I want to do X, Y, Z. And the focus is on defining who's receiving the benefit of the story. So that's the first thing. And then I want to do something. It ties every story back to a real world problem, and scenario. So that ensures that we're delivering something of quality. And then of course we've got capturing the benefit so that I can, derive a benefit. And that's crucial because that's what's ultimately driving the user story. So that's where I start personally. You're giving me a weird look.
Well, it's the reliance on the tool that I have a problem with.
Oh, I mean, I like the tool because I don't have to write. This just comes down to pure laziness.
And my writing is horrible.
I know.
As many people, I'm sure, will be able to verify. My writing is horrible, but I like the process of writing.
I don't want to write all those
stories.
Do you remember when I came on board and you guys were writing stuff on cards?
Yes.
And I said, no, this is killing my hand. The acceptance criteria alone, like I would go carpal tunnel. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. So basically my thing is I don't want to hurt my wrist anymore. So I type it out.
You have to suffer as a product owner. You have to get used to it. It's okay.
So let me give you a quick example of a good and a bad formatted story.
Okay.
The good user story. As the senior marketing executive, I need the ability to print my reports directly from the home screen so that they are accessible during login. Isn't that good?
Okay.
Great. The bad one is, as a user, I need a button to print.
That is a bad story.
It's a very bad story.
I don't like that one. So let me ask you, in your good story, which I agree is a much better story than your bad story.
Yeah.
Why does he need to do that?
Because he needs to print his reports directly from the home screen so that they're accessible during login.
Okay,
he wants to be able to do it right there when he logs in.
Okay. So that's you know the game I'm getting ready to play, right? The 5 whys.
The 5 whys.
Why? Why does he need to do that?
Because he's lazy and doesn't want to go to another screen.
Okay.
It's time consuming to find the button elsewhere.
Okay.
I don't know. That's not a real story. I made that
No,
up.
I understand, but that's when I look at stories, and personas are very key to have, I think. The format as a type of user, I want something so I can recognize some benefit. To me, that benefit, that why somebody wants to do something, is the most important part of the story. Who's going to use it? Yes, we need to know. What they're going to do, that's kind of, how the story is going to get done. But why they want to do something, that changes what we're doing. That means we may have a technology, we may have an idea, but if it doesn't meet why they're trying to do something, then we're building the wrong thing.
Agreed. I have a developer who always asks me, what's the value of this? Mm-hmm. And I like to have an answer for him immediately. So
that's good. Because that's coming too.
I know it's coming.
But
he's curious. I mean, he's not doing it to annoy me. I hope not. I think he really is curious.
Yeah.
What is the value? Why are we doing this? And it's important for us to know what the value is.
Well, yeah, because
before we build it.
That makes helps us prioritize this. I mean, if the reason why we're doing something is because we need to raise X amount of dollar over the next quarter, or we need to add another couple hundred users, or we need to reduce the time it takes to do something. Why something? That helps with the developers, it helps with the customers. It unifies everything into why we're actually doing this. And there's a great book and a great talk by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. It talks about the golden circle. The why is right in the middle. It's not what you're building. It's not how you're doing it, but it's why you're actually doing that matters more than anything. And I really like that message.
So is that the one where he actually flip-flops the formatting so you actually start with the why and then you talk about the persona?
Yes.
How would that work? What would that sound like?
In a story? Mm-hmm. I think when you're talking to the user, I want to do this, or I really like it if I could do this. Why do you want to do that? Or what benefit would you gain from doing that? Well, I wouldn't have to do this. So there's a project that I've worked on where the whole reason for doing the project is because not enough people know what's going on during the day. So they're actually spending half their day trying to figure out what's wrong. And then they're spending the rest of their day, plus some of their evening, fixing the problems. Mm. If we built them a system that they didn't have to spend half their day finding, they still have the problems, to be sure. We're not fixing that part of it because that's a big, hairy mess. But if we could fix something simple for them, to give them back 4 hours of their day and give them a system that they can actually work through something, then we've delivered some value and we've made it so that they can actually do their job instead of doing work to get ready to do their job. And I think I really like that message, and that's what I try to find, that little nugget about why we're doing something.
That's good. I like that too. In addition to having my I want to do this thing line, I also try to add more detail to the story. So I'll add descriptions, any sort of prerequisites, wireframes if I have that. I love wireframes. Balsamic. Mm-hmm. Love Balsamic. Mm-hmm. Screen mockups, any sort of attachments. So, if there's supporting documentation, I'll add that. Anything to really give the team the overall understanding of what we're building and, enough information that they can go off and build.
Yes. And this is where we
don't agree.
This is where we've had many discussions, and we will continue to have many discussions about how much do you actually put on there on the acceptance criteria. There's a great thing called The Wrong Way to Do Agile. Chet Wrong, he's a Scrum Master, and he shows an index card that he staples a 200-page requirement document to the back of it, and that's acceptance criteria, right?
That's a little extreme.
It's a little extreme, but that I like to follow the line that the acceptance criteria should be clear, but it shouldn't be a list. It shouldn't be, here's the 20 things you have to do, or here's even the 10 things you have to do. It should fit on the back of a card. That's another reason I like the card.
A really big card. An 8.5 by 11 card.
No. But it needs to fit on the back of the card. It needs to be, it needs to guide the team about what they're building and how you're going to check, but it doesn't need to be a check-off list. And that's where we get into debates. Kim and I get in debates about what I always ask you to pull stuff out of there, right? I always ask
And
you to
I pulled out like one or two words.
Do
I did.
do a little bit less. Put about 70% of what you normally would do in an acceptance criteria because, and the main reason I like that idea, and I'll let you tell me why I'm wrong.
Can you tell that I'm like
You're bouncing,
jumping out of my seat,
waiting to tell me I'm wrong. But the reason I like doing this because I want that conversation between the team and the product owner to happen, and that leaving a little bit out, but leaving enough in where they get the gist. They need to come and verify and not verify. That's the wrong word, but collaborate with you when they're building and ask their own questions, not just take what's written on the card, but that's their own questions for their understanding. Okay, go ahead. Tell me why I'm wrong.
That's a great explanation for a perfect agile world. It's a perfect team. Everybody's communicating. Everybody's talking to each other. There's collaboration. There's conversation going on left and right. That's not all companies, Cory.
No, it's not.
So you have to kind of bend the rules a little bit. And now I would rather give them too much information and know that my developer is creating what I expect him to create. My QA is testing what I expect her to test, and it's going to come to me and I can just accept it and we can move on with our life. As opposed to leaving out gaps. They don't talk. The developer does it one way. The QA person sends it back for bugs. It comes to me completely wrong. And then I have to waste my time and throw the story back. We miss it in the sprint. No. So maybe it's a little bit, it has to do with me being a bit of a control freak because I know exactly in my mind what I want to see at the end of the day. And I want to make sure that they implement it and they test it to my specifications.
Okay.
Bam. We still won't agree on this.
Well, no, we won't agree, and that's okay.
That's okay.
Okay. That's fine. But I think it's up to your context, really, and everything is about context, but it's up to your teams and everything else to determine how much you can put in there. But I would encourage you to try to put enough in there where the team can start to get an idea and move forward on their own and still involve you, that you don't have to write a book to put on the back of your card.
Unless you want to write a book, and that's okay.
And then feel free to write a book. Make it about elves and rainbows and fluffy kittens. And
so talking about acceptance criteria, Cory, you usually put 5 to 10 acceptance criteria?
Yeah.
I usually do maybe more than that. Not too many more. Depends on the story. Mm-hmm. But then I have my tester. She adds her own acceptance criteria in there, things that she's going to check. So it ends up being pretty long.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm. But acceptance criteria is mainly to answer the question of how do I know that this has been implemented correctly? Agreed? Mm-hmm. So I'm big on using the assumed voice. So for example, I would say verify that clicking this button does this thing. Not this should do this thing. This is supposed to do a thing. This can do a thing. So in my mind, when I write them, the assumption is that it's doing the thing that I expect it to do. And that's just like a pet peeve. You know, we all have our little pet peeves. Yeah. Whenever I say acceptance criteria says, this button should open a dialog window. I'm like, no, it does. You assume that it's going to because that's the purpose of the story.
It's the verify word that I always drop.
Oh, you verify?
Yeah.
Do you use confirm?
Button opens a window.
There's no action.
Nice and simple.
It's
right?
pretty simple.
Button opens the window or something like that. Because when you do this, the button shall open the window or verify that the button opens the window. That to me gets into the way to the requirement doc type format stuff that I absolutely hate.
Repel.
Yes. Repel with a passion. But yeah, I think the phrase I really like is how do you know your story is done?
Done. Yes.
Not done.
Just done.
Really done.
Yes.
And that includes your acceptance criteria and includes your definition of done for all your stories. It includes your team norm. But when this story is done, we are done with it. We don't have to go back and do anything else with it.
Right.
It is done. I loved it when I had a customer repeat that line back to me. I said that to him. He bought it. He understood it. It clicked with him and he's like, oh, that's fantastic. Done.
So as a product owner though, how do you know when it's done? How do you?
It has to be deployed.
Okay. But when you're writing the acceptance criteria,
yes.
How do you write them so that you say, okay, I've hit everything I need to have hit in order for it to be done?
Well, I think we'll get to that with some ideas that we found an article on, but I really think you're going to figure out, I'm going to use this at the end of the sprint, or I'm going to give it to a customer to use at the end of the sprint. What do I want them to do with it?
Right.
And that's where you come up with a lot of these things to say, okay, this is done. This is it. And it's not, again, we're talking about features and we'll get into splitting in a minute, but I think how are you going to actually use this at the end of the sprint is a key thing for being done. Actually, that's the next thing. And there was a listener, that we had ask about this on Twitter, about splitting stories. And I love the metaphor of cake.
Cake. Everybody loves cake.
Everybody loves cake. Delicious.
Delicious cake.
Delicious cake. Basically splitting stories into vertical slices. So when my wife bakes a cake, and she does on occasion, she usually makes 3 layers of cake. So she makes 1 layer, second, third, stack them all up, put icing on top of it, right? Nobody just wants the bottom layer of cake. Nobody wants just the middle layer of cake. They want a slice, complete and yummy, with some icing on it. Mm-hmm. To me, I don't care about your database layer. I don't care about your middleware layer. I kind of care about your UI layer, but only if I can make sense of it and use it. So when I'm developing stories, I'm building a story from the back end all the way through to the front end. And that's what I want to see delivered in a story. That slice of cake that I can actually use. I really like that metaphor.
I like that metaphor as well. I remember you telling me about that several years ago. And that really resonated with me, just the thought of the layers and the cake and having the slice.
And it really depends on what kind of team you're on too, because there are feature teams, there are component teams, there are teams that is their story. Their story is the database layer.
It's true.
Drives me up a wall because you have to integrate that at some point before somebody can use it. Just delivering a story on a database, nobody cares.
No.
Users don't care.
I always say to them, what am I supposed to demo?
Yeah.
How am I going to demo your database?
How are they going to use it at the end of the sprint?
They're not.
No, so always think cake. Always think delicious cake. Don't shortcut people on their cake.
No, give them all 3 layers.
Give them all 3 layers. Or 7, if it's a 7-layer salad.
Hey,
why not? It's still yummy. It's still a vertical slice. And when you're splitting those stories into that, you may have big themes or you may have big epics, but you just keep splitting and you keep, it's how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. So that's how we're going to make it.
Start with the ears.
Start with the ears. Start with the tail. Elephant carpaccio. Great exercise. But yeah, slice those stories. Do them in the terms of this is a feature that we can actually deliver and show. And this is not. So, or this is too big to deliver in a sprint. So we're going to slice it further, as we go. Again, focusing on what can somebody do with this when I give it to them. I think that's the key.
I like it.
Okay. Do you want to invest in anything?
I do want, so Bill Wake, who I'm assuming is a fabulous guy because he came up with this great acronym called INVEST. He talks about how to split up stories and how to create a good story, essentially. And he uses the INVEST acronym. And I asked you earlier, what comes first, the acronym or the words?
And I think it's kind of whatever your goal is you'll find a way to either backronym something or you'll find a way to use words that mean what you want them to. So yeah.
Yes. So INVEST, I for independent. So that means that the stories are not reliant on other stories and they can be developed in any sort of sequence. N for negotiable. So that's when we want to maybe take a larger story and break it out into smaller chunks. V for valuable. Obviously the story should provide value to our users. E, estimatable. So the team needs to be able to estimate the story. S for small. That's very important.
Small. Vertical slice.
Because larger stories, they're harder to validate, they're harder to estimate, they're harder to plan. So the story should be small enough to be design coded, tested, and accept it within a sprint. So small. I'm going to repeat that again. I think that's really important. And then, of course, the T is for testable. So we want to have acceptance criteria and test cases based on how the story is written, and we don't want ambiguity. So invest. When you're writing stories, think about the INVEST, invest.
Yeah, I really like that too. And I think that's something I think on our backlog of shows that we want to do, that's one I have for its own show because there's so much depth that you can get into with those things. I really like it. So yeah.
I do too. Again, Bill Wake, he's a genius.
Some of the tools. So there's lots of tools out there. I prefer simple tools. You can use Jira. You can
want
use Rally.
note cards and a pen.
I've worked with teams before that we did nothing else other than note cards, sticky notes, and a pen. And we used Jira as kind of our backup and for reporting because to your point, writing all those things down and getting them into a system, twice, is painful.
Yes.
But when you do it and put it in a tool that's designed for it, then you can do your burn down charts and you can do your sprint reports, and it makes it a lot easier. But as far as the team's concerned, all they're doing is working on cards and stickies. And
That's
I love
true.
that. I love that.
Yep.
So all kinds of tools. Use whatever you have. I want to talk briefly about some alternatives to user stories that people throw around.
Okay.
And, well, there are job stories that people use.
What's a job story?
A job story is when something happens, I want something else to happen.
So it's like a workflow?
It's kind of like a workflow, but the thing that they're job stories, use cases, and I want to talk about all these as one because they're things that people come out and say, well, we don't use user stories. We use job stories, or we use cases, or we use abuser stories, which is an odd thing that somebody forwarded to me. One of my new employees forwarded me an abuser story.
What's an abuser story?
It doesn't sound good. And it's basically, what is somebody evil going to do to your system?
Okay.
My main problem with all of these is they're all trying to take, and use cases have been around for a while. Job stories and abuser stories are fairly new. But I read through a bunch of the articles that linked some of this information. They all seem to say that they're not focused on the user, the persona. They're focused on system behavior, or what happens when something occurs in the system. My problem with most of those is because your system doesn't get used by other systems. Your system gets used by a person. That person has an outcome. It may be 3 or 4 steps down the road, but that's why you're building this thing. You're not building it so you can deploy another IBM server, or you're not deploying it because you can, it's not a technical problem you're trying to solve. It's a user problem you're trying to solve. And I think taking the focus away from the user, which is what a lot of these things tend to do, is wrong. And if your user stories are not focused on your users, that's wrong too.
Right.
You should fix those. You should make sure your personas and your users are relevant. You make sure you're solving their needs, and you don't really need to do anything else. There was a great talk by Steve Johnson a couple months ago at an Agile RTP unit talk. And the message that he had, I think, was very simple, which was, it's not, the roles, the framework, it's not that complicated. Quit trying to change it. If you use it the way it's supposed to be used, you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Stop trying to come up with new names and new roles and everything else. Just use it like it's written and you'll be fine. And I really think that's the case. So job stories, use cases, abuser stories, just write good user stories.
Just write a user story and
you'll be fine.
Avoid the rest of it.
Yeah.
So we were talking about splitting stories a few minutes ago.
Yes.
And there's this really cool diagram online. It's called How to Split a User Story, and it follows the INVEST guidelines. So they start with asking questions to see if the story can be split. And then if the answer is yes, then it asks questions about the type of story, its complexity, and so on. And then it offers guidance on splitting techniques. So this is a very, very cool diagram for any product owner. I have it up on my cube walls. I've sent it over to other POs. I hope you put the link on our page.
We will put a link.
And it's just really, really cool. So if anybody has questions and, concerns about splitting user stories, that's a very good diagram to refer to.
Can I tell you one of my pet peeves?
Okay.
When you're talking about user stories,
Yes.
refer to them as a story. If you're putting it in Jira or you're putting it in some tool and the number for that story is 456, boggles my mind when people start talking about, I'm doing 456 or I'm working on this story here. It's a story. It has a name. It has a purpose. It has a reason for being. Refer to it as that story. You don't have to say the whole thing.
Right.
But say I'm working on the story that, lets you book a flight to Tahiti, or lets you pay with a credit card, or lets you, print this report out on your front screen. That's what you should be talking about when you're referring to a story. Not, I did story 456 and I worked a little bit on story 789.
It really depersonalizes
Because
it,
who
doesn't
the
it?
hell knows what that is?
Right.
Unless you're that person working on that. Pet peeve, sorry. But don't do it. Stop that.
Stop doing that.
Stop doing that. And we found a good article called 50 Quick Ideas to Improve Your User Stories. And we went through and we picked out 3 each that we liked. Kim, do you want to read your 3 that you liked?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to say it was a really easy thing to read through. Had lots of pictures and short phrases, so it kept my attention, which is very cool. And there were 3 things that really resonated with me. The first one was imagine the demonstration. So when you're writing this story, think about actually how are you going to demo that piece of work. Number 2 is never say no, say not now, which I have a hard time saying no, so not now works for me a lot better. And then number 3 was pick impacts instead of prioritizing stories. Mm-hmm. I thought that was such a good idea.
I like that one.
Yep.
I like that. The 3 yours? That I liked, create a user story map. So I love the mapping exercise. I like the ability to walk the wall and to put every idea that we could have for a story up there, or put the functionality up on a wall and go through that stuff. I love that exercise. And we're going to definitely talk about that later.
Yes.
As well. Use low tech for story conversations. Again, cards, stickies, pens. I did a conversation with a developer, a couple months ago where we used my pens as props. And we used sticky note pads as props about how to move data around the system or what you would be doing. I love that type of stuff because it's physical. You can actually look and see, and it helps get this architecture diagramming and conceptual thinking, which I'm a very visual person. I like to see things move. So it helps me a lot. And I think it helps some developers as well. So I like that. And then start with the outputs. So again, why are you doing something? To the point of, imagine the demonstration. When you're going to show this, what do you want the outcome to be? What do you want the user to do, say, experience, and make sure the story gets to that point quickly so that you can come back and do other stories. I really like that.
Those are good. Those are 3 good ones too. There were a lot of good ones. It was hard to choose my top 3.
I know. It was good. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great.
Did we cover stories?
I think so.
I think there's a lot there. But again, I think that's the core of what we're doing is we're looking at stories, we're implementing stories, we're demoing stories.
It's a big part of my day.
Features. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So as usual, we'd love to get feedback from our listeners or any questions that they have in the PO space. If you have any problems you're facing, do you want to share any great ideas with us or any issues you have with our show, drop us a line.
And you can find us online at deliveritcast.com or Twitter at deliveritcast. And email, it's changed. It's now deliveritcast@gmail.com.
Oh, we changed it.
Yes, we did.
All right. So do we have a question of the week?
We do. This one came in from somebody, and they said, I have one developer who doesn't seem to be as motivated as my other developers. How can I encourage him to be more productive?
Oh, that's a good question.
So when I saw this, I had an idea of, I understand why somebody would ask this question because they're looking for help, because it's frustrating when you have somebody who's not engaged in your team or somebody who's not interested in that stuff. But I'm not sure this is a product owner problem. It's a product owner. It's not a problem that the product owner can solve. I think there's things, your coach, your scrum master, your resource manager, whether it's dev or test, those should be some folks that you get involved in helping with some of that. But really from a product owner's perspective, you can ask them what their interests are. You can find out, are they interested in just the database layer part of a story? Are they interested in some technology part of a story? Find out what it is that makes them interested to be part of the team, and how to get them. It would help if they could write a story. What technical things do they think need to happen, or what part of the conversation during a story grooming session do they need to talk about? Find ways to engage them around technologies, around implementation, around areas, would be my suggestions as a product owner.
I think that's a good idea. Maybe also find out what inspires them. What really kind of makes them what makes them want to come to work every day, and then give them that work. It's along the same lines of what you're saying. And if anything else, if it just fails and they're just not motivated at all, then I would escalate. bring it to their manager or, whoever the reporting structure is, or the coach if you have one.
Well, and you want the people to be invested. I mean, you want them to be bought into what you're doing.
Sure.
With the stories, with the way you're doing it. They really need to be part of the team. And if they're not being part of the team, then that's another discussion that needs to be had. But yeah, work with them, try to find out what interests them. Are they just being overrun by somebody? Are they in a depressed mood? I mean, you were always very good, and probably still are, at connecting with people and trying to get people involved and everything else. I'm less good at that.
You were fine with that.
But that's again, you have to find out what somebody's being motivated, or if they're not engaged, or what. But yeah, you can work with them. But again, I think it
always comes down to communication and understanding.
Okay. Anything else?
Nothing else that I could think of. Anything from you?
No. Next week, or I'm sorry, in 2 weeks, when we do our next show, we're going to do backlogs.
Yay!
I get to talk about backlogs.
Backlog.
One of my favorite things.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that more of a favorite than story? User stories?
I'm going to say yes, because it's a little more organized. I like the organized. I like organization.
Yes.
All right. So now it's time for our disclaimer.
Disclaimer time.
Yes. So these words are our own and are not endorsed or representative of any company or organization. Again, if you want to. Give me a tweet. You can find me at @iscoreybryan on Twitter, and I infrequently blog at don'tyellatme.wordpress.com, and Kim can be reached through the show contact info.
That's correct.
So we hope you've enjoyed Delivered It, episode 2. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.